Welcome back, everybody. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the moves that the Ottawa Redblacks have made in the 2023 CFL offseason so far. Ottawa is coming off their third straight season of missing the playoffs in 2022, and will look to change that in 2023. Last offseason, they brought in a ton of new faces, and obviously we never really got to see if it would have come to fruition with the quarterback injury to Jeremiah Mazzoli so early in the season. But even still, they were 0-4 to start the season. Just not a great season for them at all last year yet again. So we'll see if the offseason moves they've made this year will change that. So first, I want to take a look at the re-signing, starting with, of course, defensive end and most outstanding defensive player in the CFL last season, Lorenzo Mauldin. Had 17 sacks in the CFL last season. Incredible production after being a rotational pass rusher the previous couple years in Hamilton. Really broke out into a CFL star and one of the league's best players. Really the bright spot on this team, and it was essential for this defense and this team overall to bring him back. They also bring back wide receiver Nate Bahar, can fill a part of this team's ratio. Had his best season in the CFL, I believe, last season production-wise. Just a solid Canadian receiver to have on this roster, especially considering the wide receiver movement and changes that they've made from last season, as we'll see in a second. And then there's defensive back Brandon Dandridge, who I think has been an underrated part of this team the last couple of years. And I think that he could be a potential building block for this defense going forward, especially in the secondary. And then they also bring back Money Hunter, a veteran defensive back that can play the corner position, can bring some physicality to the table, and has had a pretty good last couple of seasons in the CFL. So I'm excited to see what he brings again, and what him and Dandridge really do to help shape this secondary that the Redblacks have in 2023. But anyway, those are the major re-signings. With that said, let's get into their additions and subtractions. So as I alluded to in the intro, the Redblacks spent a lot of money last offseason bringing in key free agents from around the league, and so I didn't really expect them to make too many big splashes this free agent class. Kind of see how those guys they brought in last year can really emerge as the core of this team. I give them another year to do so. But they did manage to stay pretty busy and bring in a couple of really key guys that I think could really help this team this year. So starting with linebacker Javon Santos-Knox that they bring in from the Hamilton Tiger Cats, another Tiger Cat that goes to the Redblacks, joining a guy like Lorenzo Mauldin, Jalen Acklin, to name a few. I think Santos-Knox had a really strong season last year in Hamilton. He was a player I was critical of going into last year, but he really proved me wrong and was the Tiger Cats' arguably most outstanding defensive player last year. I think he earned the team nomination for that award, but at the end of the day, I think he's a guy that is not the best middle linebacker in the league. I think he has some flaws. He's not that great laterally, in my opinion. That really limits his upside in pass coverage, but is a great downfield tackler that can contribute on the blitz as well. Just a guy that brings a lot of athleticism to the table. I just don't think he's the best pass coverage linebacker, which is why I wouldn't rate him as the top linebacker in the league, but I do think he is going to help this defense and be an upgrade over the player they had in that position last year. They also bring in defensive back Cariel Brooks, once again from the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Brooks was a surprise cut of the Tiger Cats just after free agency begun. I thought that this was super shocking because I thought that Brooks was one of the better defensive backs in the Canadian Football League the last several years, and I thought he was going to be a big part of that Tiger Cats defense going into next year, but I guess the team had other plans, and then Ottawa reaps the benefit of that by scooping him up quickly, joining a bunch of other Tiger Cats, former Tiger Cats, over in Ottawa, and I think he'll really help bring a lot of leadership to this defensive back room, pair with guys like Money Hunter and Brandon Dandridge to really make this unit very respectable and maybe even grow into one of the better units in the league. I think it was a great addition for the Redblacks, probably their best addition of the offseason in my opinion. They also bring in wide receiver Shaq Evans from the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Has had a down couple of years, really struggled with the injury bug, so we'll see if he can stay healthy in Ottawa, but I think with a fresh start, potentially he could blossom in the East Division, playing as probably the number 2 receiver in this offense with Jalen Acklin. I think if Shaq Evans could even recapture a little bit of what he showed back in 2019 when he was a top 3 receiver in the CFL, in my opinion, I think that would be worth it for Ottawa, and I think that would be a great addition for Ottawa. So we'll see what happens with Evans, hoping for the best. Decent reclamation project there. They also bring in offensive tackle Teron Vaughn from the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Not a ton of options on the free agent market if you're looking for tackles with starting experience, but Vaughn was one of them. He didn't play that great last year in Saskatchewan, but I think he has the opportunity to bounce back in a different scenario here at Ottawa. I think it's worth taking a chance on one of the few experienced guys on the market, like I said. And then they also bring in offensive lineman Drew Desjardins from the NFL, who was previously with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers back in 2021, and then spent last year kicking around practice squads in the NFL. Very talented offensive lineman. Could slot in as this team's left guard and replace another guy that they lost in free agency. I think it's still an upgrade for them. I think Desjardins could be one of the best interior offensive linemen in the league, and I think they paid him like it. I believe he is the highest paid, excuse me, highest paid offensive lineman in the league this coming season. I believe it was reported by 3 Down Nation, $250,000 or something. They also bring in running back Ante Milanovic-Litre from the Edmonton Elks. I thought Litre did pretty well in the limited opportunities he's had the past couple of years, but at the end of the day, kind of a low upside guy, not going to be a guy that really creates any big plays for you too much, but can bring some physicality to the table, and I think he's good at picking up the blitz, so I think he's a good backup running back to have for this team. And then they bring in wide receiver Lamar Durant from the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Was a total flop in Hamilton, but we'll see if he responds and gets back to that form he showed with BC back in 2019 this year in Ottawa. And then they bring in linebacker Gary Johnson, more of a backup linebacker that's more been a special teams contributor, but maybe he gets a bigger role here in Ottawa. I think they're pretty thin at that linebacker position, if I'm not mistaken. And then finally, they also bring back defensive lineman Michael Wakefield. So he's a guy that can be a rotational guy in this defense, but I wouldn't expect him to be some superstar defensive lineman or anything for this defense. I think he's a guy that provides good depth, and I thought it's a solid move for Ottawa as well. So they end up being pretty busy on the free agent market. I think a little bit busier than I expected. They bring in, I think, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, guaranteed pretty solid contributors to this team this year. So I'm really excited to see how those new additions fit in with the Red Blacks in 2023. Now turning over to the other side of the board with the losses, starting with offensive lineman Darius Sirocco, who ends up going to the Toronto Argonauts in free agency. Only spent the 1 year in Ottawa. Was kind of okay. I mean, Red Blacks fans, you'll have to let me know exactly how you felt that Sirocco played last year, but I thought he was fine from what I saw, but I do think Desjardins is an upgrade on him, so I don't think that loss will be felt too much by the Red Blacks. They also lose tackle Combre Williams, who will, in theory, be replaced by Teron Vaughn here at that left tackle spot. Combre Williams looks like he's going to retire. He hasn't officially announced it, I believe, and the CFL free agent tracker hasn't said he's retired or anything yet, but I think he was a very solid offensive lineman that I think that could be a little bit of a downgrade to Vaughn depending on how he bounces back in a new setting. And then they also lose Avery Williams, linebacker, who is replaced by Javon Santos Knox. I think that is an upgrade for the Red Blacks. I think Avery Williams kind of been a compiler of stats, being on a pretty poor defense that was on the field for a lot of snaps the past couple of years. Just never really thought he was a super high upside player, but I do think he is a guy that will hang around in the league for a while. He goes to Montreal, just down the road, and then they also lose quarterback Caleb Evans, who is a backup that, interestingly enough, set the quarterback rushing touchdown record last year for the Red Blacks. Just a bunch of 1-yard 3rd and 1 sneaks. So I think that, Caleb Evans as a starting quarterback in this league, I don't think there's much of a future there or a chance for much of a future there for him. But I do think he is a interesting athletic backup type to maybe develop. Just keep him on the roster. You never know what will happen. He goes to Montreal as well. They also lose running back William Powell. Now, Powell hasn't signed anywhere else, but I assume he's not going to be back with the team because he played pretty poorly last year, in my opinion, and I think he had one of the lowest yards per carry totals in the league. So I think his time in the CFL might be done, or he can maybe latch on with a team last minute that is in Ottawa, but I don't think he'll be back in Ottawa this season. They also lose offensive tackle Randy Richards. Don't believe he signed anywhere either, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's a major loss for them. I don't think he played all too well and hasn't played that well in the CFL for a while now, so I don't think that's a big loss for them. Then they lose 4 wide receivers here, starting with Darvin Adams, who I think is the more important of the 4. Just a veteran receiving presence that has a ceiling, just doesn't bring a ton of upside to the table, but you know what you're going to get from him on a week-to-week basis. But I don't think that is a major loss for them. I think they can replace it if Evans really does bounce back. But I do think Darvin Adams, it's worth noting, I think he is definitely a more consistent player than Shaq Evans has been. So if Shaq Evans bottoms out, I think that could be really bad for this wide receiving core, but we'll have to see what happens. They also lose Ryan Davis, is a guy that showed a lot of promise in 2021. Believe he was this team's most outstanding rookie nominee, but then just was completely invisible last year, just kind of fell out of the rotation after the moves they made last offseason. So he's on the free agent market. Don't know if he's going to be back in the CFL. And then they lose Shaq Johnson, who's a Canadian receiver that just, he's just consistently shown that he's a one-trick pony, can be a guy that can get open deep down the field with speed, but then just really doesn't have the physicality, the consistent hands, the contested catch ability to really grow as a receiver. Don't know if he's going to land somewhere in the CFL. I think he's a talented player that has, a great speed, probably one of the fastest Canadian receivers in the league, but just don't know if he's going to end up anywhere. And then longtime Ottawa Redblack RJ Harris, I believe he's been around since that 2018 team. I think that, he's had a couple of really good years in Ottawa. Shouldn't say really good. I think it's been really solid years in Ottawa, but I don't think he is a guy that really raises the ceiling for this offense. I think he's just a solid 4th or 5th receiver in the CFL. May get picked up with a team, may not, but we'll have to see what happens with him. And then they also lose defensive lineman Davon Coleman and defensive end Kwaku Boateng. Coleman still hasn't signed with a team, I believe, and Boateng goes to Hamilton. I don't think that either are too big of a loss, seeing as Boateng didn't even play a snap for Ottawa last year, got injured in training camp, unfortunately. And Coleman, just a solid defensive tackle, but doesn't really move the needle one way or the other. Not a great pass rusher, not a great run stuffer or anything like that. I think that he's a solid 4 or 5 sack a year guy that just doesn't provide a ton of upside for that defense. So I don't think that's a huge loss for them either. And then the final guy they lose here is a veteran running back Brandon Landers to retirement. Just a backup and special teams running back for them, but has been a leadership guy on this team for many years now. So we'll have to see if that is somewhat missed in that locker room this season. And we'll have to see if these guys that they lose, overall, I don't think are going to make a big difference, because I don't think this was that great of a roster to begin with. I think that the core guys that they want to build around, they brought in last season, and then these guys are largely, for the most part, guys that were around before last season that they let walk out the door here. So going to be very interesting to see what happens this season in Ottawa, and if they can get back in the playoffs after missing it for 3 straight years. But with that said, that is going to do it for today's video. Be sure to let me know what you guys think about the Ottawa Redblacks going into the 2023 CFL season. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.